Hello everybody, it's your boy, Jmulls here today, continuing my series of Game Awards videos, the Game Awards. So let's talk about the best music, and let's talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and its OST, because this game freaking deserves it. It is by far my favorite soundtrack of the year, and one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. For those not familiar with Xenoblade or its style of music, let me do my best to try and describe it. I'm no expert, but I like to think I'm decent enough at describing what and why I like something, and with Xenoblade's music, I think what I like the most is its range and implementation. Most of the soundtrack is composed of large orchestral-themed songs, with maybe one or two predominant instruments. 3 placed special emphasis on the flute, since the flute, for those who don't know, is what the main characters use to send on the souls of the dead and those who are forgotten as they travel the open world. A life sent on is a perfect microcosm of the strengths of 3's ODST. Not ODST, sorry, I got Halo in the mind. OST, for a lot of reasons. There's multiple versions of it depending on which flute you are using to do the off-seeing. And there's a third version for if both main characters perform the act known as off-seeing that I described before. These moments are normally reserved, those big story climactic moments where there are a lot of casualties, or if you find a large group of what they call husks out in the open world. I'll leave a link in the description to an interview a couple of the leads behind the game did before the game launched early this year. And in it, I think page 2, they describe the process of coming up with the soundtrack and creating and designing real versions of these flutes created to be used to record the songs in this game. One is longer and darker while the other is smaller and white, and they're used to represent the nations of Kevers and Agnes, with one flute producing lower notes and the other higher notes respectively. And it is upon these rocks that Monolith Soft builds its church, its musical foundation. These two flutes, and this duality, in just this one song, like I said, are the perfect microcosm for the entire soundtrack and why it works so well. Because the story itself and the game add personality and meaning behind these notes, more than they already had as standalone songs. A Life Sent On starts off slow with long and drawn-out notes, and over time, the notes become just a little bit shorter as other instruments are brought into the scene. A piano plays in the background. The song becomes busier, for lack of a better phrase, and it gets louder and it just swells. It's honestly a good metaphor for the feeling of loss and sadness that results from death or departing. It starts off a low and emotional instrument in a sea of endless silence until all the emotions just start crescendoing together as this torrent of emotion is laid out for all to see, or in this case here, as those feelings of sadness turn into sadness of a different flavor. It's hope that the souls or souls of the departed have moved on to a better place. You don't know where they're going, but knowing isn't the point. Hell, there's an entire cutscene in the game devoted to that. It helps those who remain feel just a little bit of solace and closure with it all. The song does what all good music does, tell a story, and it's used multiple times in this game in various situations, and the emotional impact of the scene is always enhanced because of its presence. Hell, you could even interpret the other instruments in the song that come in later on as other almost angelic presences that join you in the song to whisk the souls of the departed away, if you really want to get metaphorical with it. And honestly, I like that interpretation. Now, if it was just this song, I'd argue a game needs more than one song with a few versions to be called Best Soundtrack of the Year, unless the year was just kind of dull for music, but it wasn't. 2022 was an amazing year for video game OSTs that were accompanied by great games. So if I'm going to say that Xenoblade 3 was my favorite of the year, it needs more than just A Life Sent On, despite the fact it's probably one of, if not my favorite song of the year. Well, about a month or two back, I made a video on the music of Xenoblade 3 where I went into the specifics about why I love 2 of the main songs in the game. They're both lyric songs, and one that comes in at Chapter 5 during a major moment, a very emotional one, and you know exactly what I'm talking about if you played it, and also the finale theme song, A Step Away and Where We Belong, respectively. Now, I'm no musician or let alone a music theorist, but I think I was able to articulate why I love both of those songs and what they contribute to the overall story. But here's the thing, I love all the music of 3 just like that. Sure, compared to other Xenoblade games, the zone themes and a lot of the songs could be considered a little bit toned down and mellow, but I think it has its charm all of its own. It matches the aesthetic of the game in comparison to Xenoblade 1 or 2 or X, where it feels like a more grounded experience. It's not to say the music's stale or downplayed or anything. There's grand orchestral moments, some absolutely banging rock songs that play during battle. And honestly, I just find it relaxing walking through the open world, hearing the sheer diversity of music on display, with the various songs that play in various parts of its world. The desert being a particular highlight for me. Seeing the giant Mechonis hand jut out beneath the surface as that song plays, it sets a mood, a tone, of this once great monolith having been reduced to nothing but a ruin in Xenoblade 3. This iconic piece of the series, the Mechonis from Xenoblade 1, nothing more than a sword on the horizon and a weathered, rusted hand jutting out from beneath the sand. And the song that plays suits that feeling. I find it relaxing, just looking at all the various references the world's able to cram into it, while all this nostalgic-esque music plays as you become nostalgic for what once was. It's very fitting in my opinion. But for me, a game's soundtrack isn't just as good as the songs that are used, but also on their implementation. It's a video game after all, and you can have an incredible ingredient, but it needs to fit with the overall product. A food analogy might be good here. You may absolutely adore onion rings, but you might not want them with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Like, the ingredients have to be good on their own, but they have to work in terms of the overall package. And that's the part where Xenoblade 3's soundtrack truly shines. The game uses its soundtrack as part of its storytelling. It enhances, bolsters even, the main scenes and these emotional bits where it needs to. And hell, on multiple occasions, the songs also act to control the pacing of your emotions, almost playing your reaction like a puppeteer, controlling the strings of your heart. Chapter 5 is a perfect example of this, and one that I covered in that video I mentioned before, where the song uses its speed and tempo to almost foreshadow the player as to what is coming in the immediate future. I'm talking about the next 10 seconds, in terms of what emotions the game is expecting for you to feel and wants you to feel. It prepares them and puts them in a state of mind that will be receptive to the type of emotion the game is trying to instill in that next line of dialogue, whether it be hope, fear, desperation, or whatever. Because a lot of the time, a video game's soundtrack isn't just remembered because the songs themselves are good, but also based on the implementation. Metal Gear Rising is an excellent example of this. Where yeah, those songs are incredible, but because they used how they used in those bosses, with those dynamic transitions into lyrics and stuff like that, it makes it all the more memorable. Because when you listen to that song, when I say rules of nature, you're probably immediately transported to a particular scene in Metal Gear Rising, where you're fighting the giant Rex at the very beginning. Because that is the power of video game music that a lot of other mediums don't really have. Where, sure, you might think of a particular song with a particular scene in a show or a movie, but in a video game, you're interacting in that world. That song's becoming the soundtrack to your experience with that world and that story, those characters, that game. If you hear a Life Sent On, chances are you're probably going to remember where you were multiple times when you heard that song, those versions, where you were when you first heard Where We Belong. Because a good video game soundtrack doesn't just feel good on its own, it's also a mechanism to help you remember and almost instill these scenes and what you're feeling and what your experience is at that point in time into the deeper parts of your memory so they become everlasting. And that's what Xenoblade always manages to do so well. They do such a great job of pairing a scene with a particular song and making that scene and that song stick because the moment itself is so emotional and impactful for you. At least for me. You may have a completely different experience. And that's fine. I can only tell you mine and how I feel and what I think and what my preferences are. Yours may be completely different. Hell, you may have completely different experiences and takeaways from these songs. Maybe you had a similar experience with a different game. That's awesome. Like I said before, this was an amazing year for video game OSTs. And that variety of opinions, everyone seemingly having a different answer, I think that's a beautiful thing. Because that's telling me that the medium of video games is doing well. Because people are able to have these experiences with not just one product. But for me, that one product, the one game I will point to for years to come and say this was the year where one of my top 10 games of all time came out, That will be 2022, and that will be with Xenoblade 3, and a large part of that is because of the music. They know how to arrange a soundtrack. It's composed of a solid variety of sounds that break the flow up, so you aren't just listening to one style over and over again. I'm the type of person that loves and enjoys many different genres of music, and Xenoblade 3 has a sound to it, but it also has multiple different sounds under that overall umbrella sound that feels and harkens you back to Xenoblade. And those songs, those motifs, there's so much storytelling just in the music alone, and how it's used and implemented in the story, it makes these scenes memorable to me. And I can't give you a specific here, but I'm pretty sure I read in a YouTube comment when I was researching different songs in Xenoblade 3 and just listening to them on YouTube. I'm pretty sure a couple people have pointed out that the first battle theme you hear in the tutorial, yeah, the final zone, that theme is a remix of that very first song you heard, so everything comes full circle. So again, that cyclical nature is part of Xenoblade 3's story, so the music itself and the way it's implemented is furthering that story, even on a subconscious level. Because you might not consciously or actively understand that's what that song was doing, but at some point in your mind, your brain's making that connection, subconsciously. And like, it's all coming full circle, I'm not entirely sure why, but it is. The worlds in the freaking loop, all these things interact and interlink with one another, get it? To make a product greater than the sum of its parts. You have those heavier rock-type songs for battle and hype moments, and those swelling orchestrals for emotional scenes. It has it all, and that has always been Xenoblade's strength when it comes to its soundtrack, and 3 is right up there with the best of them. I adore Xenoblade 3, and I adore its soundtrack immensely. And for all those reasons, and probably more that I haven't even thought of yet, that is why Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has my favorite soundtrack of the year. Granted, Crisis Core's about to come out in a few days, and who knows, maybe I'm a bit of a sucker for Final Fantasy music, so who knows. But I find it extremely hard to surpass Xenoblade 3 this year. Xenoblade tends to have my favorite soundtracks. Okay, if I made a top 5 of video game soundtracks of all time, 3 of those spots are probably Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3. Honestly, 4, because I might have to include X. Okay, maybe top 10, but you get my point. This series is built on a foundation of amazing music, and 3 did not disappoint for me. I've heard a variety of opinions regarding Xenoblade 3's soundtrack, and some really interesting perspectives that you have all left in my comments down below, and I'm appreciative of that. I don't want you all just, like, agreeing with me, right? I want you to have your own opinions, and I want you to be willing to present them. I would love to read your opinions and hear your thoughts and hear your perspectives. It's one of the things that makes this all so interesting. All this discussion. Because that's one of the, like I said before, that's the beauty of the industry. That's the beauty of the medium. Where all these opinions can be allowed to exist. And to me, Xenoblade 3 appealed to me in terms of its soundtrack more than any other game this year. For me, God of War probably isn't that far behind, but it's a different style of soundtrack. It uses its music for different things. And when I beat God of War Ragnarok, we'll probably have to revisit this topic so I can talk about how God of War uses its music or uses other aspects of its storytelling. We got a lot of great games this year. And for me, the end of the year is a good time to celebrate them, to celebrate all the amazing experiences that we've had this year with video games. So let's do that. Leave a comment down below with your favorite soundtrack of the year. And if yours was Xenoblade 3, let me know why. What song was a standout for you? What did you not like? What did you love? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.